The rain had been falling for many days so hard and heavy that it looked like the sky itself was breaking apart. The planet Vereen, once full of color and life, now looked like a world made only of water and storm. Huge waves covered the lands that were once full of shining gardens, tall crystal towers, and green fields. The air was thick with mist, and lightning flashed every few seconds, turning the dark sky white for a moment and then back to black again. Lyra, an alien mother, moved carefully through the deep water that reached up to her knees. Her skin, pale blue and soft like moonlight, was covered with mud and dust. Her golden eyes, once calm and bright, now showed only worry and tiredness. She held her small child, Ren, close to her chest, wrapping him in a silver fabric that was soaked through but still warm enough to protect him from the cold wind. "Hold on, Ren," she whispered softly, her voice almost lost in the storm. "We will find a dry place soon. I promise." The child didn't speak. He was small, maybe 5 years old in human years, and he was too weak to say anything. His tiny hand clutched the edge of her clothing, his breathing shallow but steady. Every few minutes he would look up at her face with big golden eyes that looked exactly like hers, full of trust that she didn't feel anymore. They were the last ones left in their area. The other families had escaped weeks ago when the government ships came to take survivors to the space stations above. But Lyra's husband had fallen sick during the early floods. He couldn't travel, and she refused to leave him behind. By the time she buried him under the last dry piece of ground she could find, the final ship had already gone. Since then, the water had kept rising. Now there was nothing left but endless waves, destroyed homes and floating pieces of broken buildings. Every sound was either thunder or the crash of water. The sky had no stars anymore, only gray clouds that never moved. Lyra looked around, her heart heavy but her mind alert. She needed to find shelter before night came again. Nights were worse. The temperature dropped, and cold winds swept across the water, freezing everything in their path. She spotted a half-broken tower in the distance, a communication post from the old cities. Maybe, she thought, it could give them a little safety for a few hours. She pushed forward through the flood, each step slow and painful. The water was full of debris, shards of glass, metal pieces, and old wires. Sometimes she had to stop and pull something sharp away from her path so it wouldn't hurt the child. Her arms ached from holding him, but she never loosened her grip. Every movement was driven by one thought only: keep him alive. As she reached the base of the tower, the water was waist-high. She climbed over a broken wall and stepped into the lower part of the structure. Inside, the air was still and damp, but at least it was dry enough to sit. She laid Ren down on a piece of tilted floor and covered him with a blanket from her small bag. Then she sat down beside him, closing her eyes for a moment to rest. The sound of the storm outside felt like a monster breathing. Every few seconds, thunder roared like the sky was angry. Lyra looked up at the cracked ceiling, where rain dripped through tiny holes, and she wondered if any of the other planets nearby could see the destruction happening here. Did anyone know Vereen was dying? Did anyone even care? She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small metal device, a beacon. It was old and weak, but it still had a little power left. She turned it on, and a faint red light blinked. "Please," she whispered to herself. "Let someone see this, anyone." The beacon signal wasn't strong enough to reach far, but it gave her something to hope for. She kept it near the window opening where the light could be seen from above. Maybe a ship passing through the area would notice it. Ren stirred in his sleep and began to cry softly. Lyra quickly moved closer, stroking his forehead gently. "Shh, my little star," she said. "Everything will be all right. You're safe. I'm here." He quieted down, but Lyra knew the truth. They weren't safe, not yet. The storm was spreading to all parts of the planet. The scientists had warned years ago that the planet's core was heating up too fast. Nobody had listened until it was too late. Now the whole world was drowning. Hours passed slowly. Lyra stared out at the dark water stretching endlessly in every direction. Once she saw something floating, maybe a small ship or a piece of a building, but it vanished quickly under the waves. She hugged her knees and tried to think of her home before the flood. The sound of her son's laughter, the smell of flowers from the floating gardens, the taste of sweet fruit from their trees. Those memories felt like they belonged to someone else now. When she finally closed her eyes, she dreamed of sunlight. Not the white, sharp light from lightning, but real sunlight, warm and golden, touching her face. She dreamed of land under her feet, of peace, of her husband's voice telling her that everything would be fine. Then the dream broke as another loud thunderclap shook the tower. Lyra woke up with a start. The storm had grown even worse. The waves outside were higher now, splashing against the tower with violent force. She checked the beacon. The light was still blinking, weak but steady. She took it as a sign to hold on a little longer. Her body was tired, her hands shaking, but she refused to give up. She looked at Ren, still sleeping, and whispered again, "Someone will come, my love. Someone will find us." Outside, the rain didn't stop. The planet continued to flood, the ocean swallowing everything that had once been alive. But inside that small tower, one mother's hope still burned quietly, stronger than the storm. And far away in the cold silence of space, a small human ship was passing through that sector. Its pilot unaware that soon, his path would cross with a desperate beacon from a dying world, and his life would never be the same again. Commander Ethan Cross had flown through many parts of space, but this area of the galaxy always felt different. The stars here looked dimmer, the silence deeper. He had worked for the Interstellar Frontier Service for almost 8 years, flying cargo between outposts, repairing satellites, and sometimes checking abandoned worlds. Most of the time those missions were boring, just endless stars and empty planets. But Ethan didn't mind. He liked being alone in space. It gave him peace that no city ever could. That day he was flying over the coordinates of Vereen, a planet that had been declared unsafe 3 years ago. His orders were simple: scan the orbit, make sure no illegal ships were trying to land, and then move on. The Frontier Service had long stopped sending rescue missions there because of the floods and radiation. The planet was officially unrecoverable. But as his cruiser glided silently over the clouds, his radar made a small sound, a faint beep, barely noticeable. Ethan frowned. It was an old signal, very weak, like a heartbeat far away. He adjusted the sensors and leaned closer to the screen. "That can't be right," he muttered. The planet's data said no life readings remained, yet the radar was showing something small, something warm, near the northern hemisphere. He hesitated. Many pilots would have ignored it. It was easier that way, but Ethan wasn't built like most pilots. He still remembered when he was a child on Earth, during the great floods that had taken half the continent. His father had told him, "If you ever see a life sign, don't question it, save it." So Ethan did what he always did when something didn't make sense. He followed his instincts. He turned his cruiser around and lowered altitude. Breaking through the thick storm clouds of Vereen, the wind howled as his ship entered the atmosphere. Heavy rain splattered against the windshield, and lightning flashed dangerously close. "Still the same wild weather," he said under his breath. His hands moved quickly over the controls, adjusting the stabilizers. Through the fog, he saw the world below, a broken, flooded planet. Whole cities were underwater, their rooftops barely visible above the waves. The remains of roads and towers looked like skeletons of a once beautiful world. The radar beeped again, guiding him toward the signal's direction. It came from near an old communication tower, half collapsed but still standing above the flood. Ethan's heart beat faster. What kind of signal could survive this long? He wondered. He activated the ship's scanner and found a faint red pulse, an emergency beacon. It was so old it could have been from the original evacuation days. But the signal wasn't random. It was blinking in a steady rhythm. Someone had turned it on recently. His training told him not to land. The weather was unstable and rescue was not allowed on restricted planets. But as he looked out the window at the endless water in the dying world, he couldn't shake the thought, what if someone's alive down there? He opened the communication channel. "Control, this is Ethan Cross from Cruiser 07F. I'm detecting a faint beacon signal on Vereen's surface, requesting permission to investigate." Static filled the line for a few seconds before a cold, robotic voice replied, "Permission denied, Commander. Vereen is off limits. No recovery operations are authorized. Continue your patrol route." Ethan stared at the console. The voice sounded final, but he couldn't walk away. He thought about that tiny blinking light below, somewhere under the storm, waiting. He leaned back in his chair and sighed. "Sorry, Control," he whispered, "but I'm not that kind of man." He switched off his tracker and manual override alarm. The cruiser tilted downward and began to descend through the thick rain clouds. The ship shook as the atmosphere fought against it, but Ethan stayed focused. He guided it down near the signal, scanning for a solid surface. Most of the ground was underwater, but there was a small tower top barely visible above the waves. That had to be it. The cruiser landed roughly on a tilted piece of structure beside the tower. The metal beneath creaked, but it held. The moment he opened the hatch, cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of rain and metal. The sound of thunder was so loud it felt like the sky itself was shouting. Ethan pulled on his weathersuit and helmet, grabbing a light and a safety cable. He tied it to the ship's hook and began walking toward the tower. The water reached his knees, then his waist. Every step was heavy, the storm pulling against him. "Come on," he muttered. "Whoever you are, you better still be there." The tower's door was jammed halfway underwater. He used his laser tool to cut through the metal and climbed inside. The air inside was damp and cold. He moved his light slowly around the room. Broken walls, shattered glass, bits of machinery everywhere. For a second he thought maybe it was empty. Then he saw it, the faint red blink of the beacon light near the corner. He moved closer, and that's when he saw something else. A small bundle covered in silver fabric lying near the wall. He froze. The bundle moved. "Wait, that's someone's here," he whispered. He rushed forward and gently pulled back the fabric. Inside, a small child blinked up at him, eyes glowing gold in the dim light. The child let out a weak sound, more like a sigh than a cry. Ethan's heart pounded. "Hey there, little one," he said softly. "It's okay. I've got you." Then a voice came from the shadow. Weak, trembling, but clear. "Please, don't hurt him." Ethan turned quickly. An alien woman, thin and pale, was leaning against the wall. She looked exhausted, her hands shaking as she tried to stand. "You're safe," he said gently. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm human. Commander Ethan Cross. I came because of your signal." She stared at him for a long moment, trying to understand his words. Then she gave a small nod, relief filling her eyes. Her voice was soft, almost breaking. "I thought no one would come." Ethan stepped forward and offered his hand. "Let's get you both out of here before the storm takes this place down." The alien mother hesitated, then slowly took his hand. Her fingers were cold and delicate. He helped her stand, then picked up the child carefully, wrapping him close to his chest. Outside, the storm had grown stronger. The waves smashed against the walls as Ethan pulled the safety line tight and began leading them back to the cruiser. The wind screamed around them and rain beat against their faces, but he didn't stop. Every step felt like walking through a nightmare. But now there was something worth fighting for. When they finally reached the cruiser, Lyra, the alien mother, collapsed inside, gasping for air. The child clung to her weakly. Ethan sealed the hatch shut and turned on the engines. Through the window, he saw the tower crumble into the water. They had made it just in time. As the cruiser rose higher, breaking through the storm clouds, Ethan looked at the two figures sitting quietly behind him. The alien mother was watching the window, tears mixing with rainwater on her cheeks. The child rested in her arms, safe at last. Ethan didn't know who they were or what their story was, but he knew one thing for certain. The universe had just changed for all three of them. The storm outside didn't stop. It chased the cruiser like an angry sea trying to pull it back. Inside, Ethan Cross worked the controls with steady hands, his eyes moving quickly over the flashing screens. Every alarm in the ship was ringing, warning him about strong winds, lightning, and unstable air pressure. But he didn't care. He just needed to get high enough to escape the storm before it tore the ship apart. Behind him, the alien mother, Lyra, sat holding her child tightly. The boy's small body trembled every time thunder boomed. Lyra whispered soft words to calm him, her voice filled with warmth even though her face looked pale and tired. Ethan could hear her voice through the noise, and it was gentle like a song, though he couldn't understand her language. "Come on, hold together, girl," Ethan muttered to the ship. The cruiser shook again, but the engines fought back, glowing a faint blue as they climbed higher. Outside the windows, the violent clouds started to fade. Slowly, the color of the storm changed from dark gray to silver. Then suddenly they broke through the top of the storm. It was like flying into a dream. Above the clouds, everything was calm and quiet. The light from the nearby sun reflected off the silver mist, painting the ship in a warm glow. For the first time in hours, Ethan let out a deep breath of relief. "We made it," he whispered. He turned around to check on his passengers. Lyra was sitting with her eyes closed, holding her child as if afraid he would disappear. Her body was shaking slightly, not from cold, but from exhaustion and disbelief. Ethan moved closer and crouched beside her. "Hey," he said softly. "You're safe now. The storm can't reach us up here." Lyra looked at him slowly, her golden eyes reflecting the soft light. She didn't understand every word, but she could feel his meaning. She nodded weakly. "Safe?" she repeated, the word sounding strange in her accent. Ethan smiled. That's right. Safe. He pulled out a small blanket from the storage cabinet and handed it to her. She wrapped it around the child and whispered something that sounded like a blessing. The boy opened his eyes and looked at Ethan for the first time. There was something deep in that look, curiosity and innocence mixed with quiet fear. Ethan gave him a small smile and said, "Hey there, buddy." The boy didn't answer, but his small hand gripped the edge of the blanket tighter. Ethan returned to his pilot seat, checking the systems again. The cruiser's energy levels were lower than he liked. The storm had drained a lot of power. They needed to reach the nearest safe zone soon, or the ship would lose fuel. But there was another problem. Rescuing non-human survivors without clearance was against Frontier Service rules. If he reported it, Lyra and her child would be taken away for quarantine and testing. They might never see each other again. Ethan frowned, tapping the control screen nervously. I'll figure it out later, he thought. Right now, they just need to rest. He set the ship to autopilot and stood up. He prepared 2 cups of hot liquid from the supply unit, one for himself, one for Lyra. When he handed it to her, she hesitated before taking it. She sniffed it, then looked at him questioningly. Ethan smiled. It's just water with nutrients. Safe to drink. She took a small sip. Her eyes widened slightly at the warmth. Then she nodded and drank slowly. The child reached for her cup and she shared a little with him. It was a simple moment, quiet and human even though they were from different worlds. After a few minutes, Ethan sat across from them. My name's Ethan, he said, tapping his chest. Ethan. Lyra watched him, trying to understand. Then she pointed to herself and said, Lyra. He smiled. Lyra, that's a nice name. He pointed to the child. And him? She looked down at her son lovingly. Ren. Ethan repeated it softly. Ren. The boy blinked and tilted his head curiously, as if surprised the human could say it right. For a while, no one spoke. The only sound was the low hum of the cruiser's engines and the occasional beep from the control panels. The peace felt strange after the chaos they had just escaped. Lyra leaned back, closing her eyes, and Ren rested his head on her shoulder. Ethan turned off the lights except for the small ones near the cockpit. He sat quietly, staring out the window at the endless stars. The storm below looked small now, just a swirling gray cloud under a blanket of light. Yet he couldn't stop thinking about the flooded world they had left behind. So much life had been lost there, so many families gone, and somehow, out of all that destruction, these 2 had survived long enough for him to find them. After some time, Ethan stood up and walked back to the controls. He sent a message to the nearest human outpost, reporting his position but leaving out one important detail: the rescue. He only said he was running a systems check over an abandoned zone. He didn't know how long he could hide the truth, but he wanted to buy some time. When he turned around, Lyra was awake again, watching him silently. She didn't speak, but she gave him a small nod of gratitude. He understood it perfectly. No words were needed between them anymore. A few hours later, as they passed into calmer space, the child began to stir. He looked around the cabin, eyes wide with wonder. The stars outside fascinated him. He pointed at them and said something in his own language that made his mother smile softly. Ethan chuckled. Yeah, they're beautiful, aren't they, kid? Lyra looked at Ethan and then at the stars again. She tried to say something but struggled with the words. Your home? She asked slowly, pointing toward the stars. Ethan nodded. Out there somewhere, he said. Earth, my home. She tilted her head, repeating the word softly. Earth. Then she pointed down toward the flooded planet they had escaped. Varine. Their eyes met for a moment in a silent exchange of understanding. 2 different worlds, 2 lives connected by one small act of kindness. Later, when Lyra and Ren finally fell asleep on the seats, Ethan sat quietly watching over them. He adjusted the temperature so it stayed warm and dimmed the cabin lights even more. The ship moved smoothly now, gliding through space like a calm bird after a storm. Ethan leaned back, rubbing his tired eyes. He thought about what to do next. If he took them to the main base, they'd be taken away. But if he didn't, he'd break every rule in the book. Still, when he looked at Lyra's peaceful face and the child's soft breathing, he knew his decision was already made. He whispered to himself, You're safe now. I don't care what they say, you're safe. As the cruiser drifted quietly toward the distant stars, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. He wasn't just another pilot following orders anymore. He was a man who had chosen to save life no matter where it came from. And deep in the silence of space, where the stars watched over them like gentle eyes, 3 hearts, human and alien alike, rested together, alive, and finally safe from the storm. The stars outside the cruiser moved slowly as the ship traveled through the dark space between worlds. For the first time since leaving the flooded planet, everything was calm. The engines hummed quietly and the lights inside glowed softly, painting the small cabin with gentle shades of gold. Ethan sat at the controls, his eyes fixed on the navigation screen, but his thoughts were somewhere else. He had sent another false report to the Frontier Service, a short message saying his patrol mission was continuing without issues. It was a lie, but a harmless one, he told himself. The truth was something the service would never accept. Behind him, Lyra and Ren were both awake now. The child sat near the window, pressing his small hands against the glass as he watched the passing stars with wide eyes. Every time a comet streaked by, he would gasp softly and point, making sounds of wonder in his own language. His laughter filled the cabin like sunlight after rain. Lyra smiled quietly as she watched him. Her face was still tired, but there was a softness in her eyes that hadn't been there before, the kind that only hope could bring back. She noticed Ethan looking at them through the reflection in the glass and gave him a small nod, a silent thank you for everything he had done. Ethan turned back to his controls but smiled a little. He wasn't used to this kind of company. Most of his missions were silent and lonely. Yet somehow having them there made the ship feel warmer. After a few minutes, he stood and walked toward them. "You're both okay?" he asked slowly, using simple words and hand gestures. Lyra understood enough to nod. She placed a hand on her chest and said, "Good, safe." Then she pointed at him. "You to help." Ethan chuckled softly. "Yes, I helped a little," he said, though she couldn't understand the words completely. Still, the tone made her smile. He sat down across from them and turned on a small holographic map that showed nearby planets. A few human colonies were within reach, but most were official stations, the kind that would ask too many questions. One, however, was different, an independent colony named New Haven, built on a small moon at the edge of the trade routes. It was known for helping travelers and refugees quietly, without involving the authorities. Ethan had been there once before and remembered how they treated everyone with respect, no matter where they came from. He tapped the map and looked at Lyra. "We'll go here," he said, pointing to New Haven's glowing mark. "Safe place. Good people." Lyra leaned forward, studying the map. She didn't understand the name, but when she saw the warm tone in his eyes, she nodded slowly. "Safe," she repeated softly. Ethan adjusted the coordinates. The ship changed direction smoothly, heading toward the moon's far horizon. The next few hours passed peacefully. Lyra helped organize the supplies. Even though she didn't know how the human systems worked, she learned quickly by watching. She used her gentle hands to clean the small wounds on Ren's arms, and then checked Ethan's too after noticing a small cut on his wrist. He tried to wave her off, saying, "It's nothing," but she shook her head firmly and wrapped it with clean cloth anyway. Ethan laughed quietly, surprised at how caring she was even after all she had been through. When the lights dimmed to night mode, Lyra told a quiet story to Ren in her native language. Ethan couldn't understand the words, but the melody of her voice was soft and beautiful, rising and falling like a gentle song. The boy listened with sleepy eyes until he finally drifted off, his head resting in his mother's lap. Ethan leaned back in his chair, listening. For a long time there was only silence and the distant hum of the engines. The stars outside looked like a sea of diamonds, endless and still. Lyra looked up and noticed him watching. "You alone?" she asked slowly, using one of the few human words she had learned. Ethan smiled faintly. "Most of the time," he admitted. "I travel alone. Easier that way." She tilted her head slightly, not understanding all the words but sensing the meaning. "Sad," she said softly. He blinked, surprised. "Sad?" She nodded, touching her chest and then pointing at him. "You, heart sad." For a moment, Ethan didn't know what to say. She was right in a way. He had spent so many years flying through space, carrying cargo from one cold station to another, never staying long enough to make friends or feel at home anywhere. Saving people wasn't part of his job anymore, but maybe it should have been. He smiled faintly and said, "Maybe a little." Lyra gave him a gentle look, full of quiet understanding. Then she looked down at her sleeping child and whispered, "You good man." Ethan's throat tightened slightly. He turned away, pretending to check the controls, but her words stayed with him. In all his years, he couldn't remember the last time someone had called him that. As they continued their journey, small moments of connection began to fill the silence between them. Lyra showed him how her people used energy crystals for healing. She took one small glowing stone from her bag and placed it near the ship's broken scanner, humming softly as she moved her fingers around it. To Ethan's amazement, the scanner flickered back to life. "You fixed it?" he asked. Lyra smiled and nodded proudly. Ren, curious and bright, began repeating some human words Ethan taught him. "Star, ship, home," he said slowly, smiling each time he got one right. Ethan laughed and ruffled his hair, saying, "You're a fast learner, kid." For a while, it almost felt like they were a small family drifting together through the quiet stars. But Ethan knew their time together couldn't last forever. Once they reached New Haven, Lyra and Ren would have a new home, one safe from danger, far from the flooded ruins of Vereen. Still, a part of him already felt the ache of knowing he'd have to say goodbye soon. As the moon of New Haven appeared in the distance, glowing softly against the black sky, Ethan's thoughts turned heavy. The rules of the Frontier Service were clear. What he had done was forbidden. If anyone ever found out, he could lose his ship, his job, maybe even his freedom. But when he looked at Lyra and Ren sleeping side by side, he knew he wouldn't have changed a single thing. He whispered to himself, "Some things are worth breaking the rules for." The cruiser approached the landing zone, the light from New Haven settlements shining gently below. It was a peaceful place full of life and calm, a world untouched by storms or war. As the ship entered its atmosphere, Ethan felt a deep sense of peace. He glanced at Lyra one more time. She was awake again, watching the window with awe. Her eyes shone as she saw the green fields and silver lakes of the moon below. It was as if hope itself had taken shape before her. Ethan smiled quietly. "Welcome home," he whispered, though he knew she might not understand the words. But she smiled back anyway, as if she did. For the first time in a long while, Ethan Cross felt something inside him heal. A quiet warmth that came not from stars or machines, but from the simple act of saving two lives that had once been forgotten by the universe. The morning light on New Haven was different from anything Lyra had seen before. It was soft and golden, spreading gently over the hills and silver lakes. The air smelled clean, like fresh rain and green leaves. After so many days inside the metal ship, this world felt alive, warm, peaceful, and safe. Ethan guided the cruiser down the narrow landing path toward the small colony ahead. The settlement was made of low, shining buildings surrounded by fields and gardens. People moved calmly through the streets, smiling as they carried tools, crates, and baskets. It was a quiet place, the kind of place where no one asked too many questions. When the ship landed, a few colonists came forward. They wore simple clothes, their faces kind but cautious. One of them, a woman with gray hair and bright eyes, stepped closer. "Welcome to New Haven," she said. "Name and reason for landing?" Ethan smiled politely. "Just travelers," he said. "She and the boy need a place to stay. They're refugees." The woman studied Lyra and Ren. She could see the strange patterns on their skin and the way their eyes glowed slightly in the light. Marks of another world. But instead of fear, her face softened with compassion. "You've come to the right place," she said. "We don't turn anyone away here." Ethan felt relief wash over him. He had been afraid someone might question them or report to the service, but New Haven was exactly as he remembered. A sanctuary for the lost. Lyra looked around with wide eyes. Everything was new to her. The smell of flowers, the warmth of the wind, even the gentle buzzing of insects nearby. Ren ran a few steps ahead, laughing as he tried to catch a butterfly. It was the first time Ethan had heard the boy laugh freely since they met. The colonists took them to a small home near the edge of the fields, a simple house made of light stone and wood. Inside were clean beds, fresh water, and a warm fire glowing softly in the corner. Lyra touched the wooden wall, her fingers tracing the texture as if she couldn't believe it was real. "Home," she whispered softly. Ethan nodded. "Yes, your new home." For a moment, Lyra's eyes filled with tears. She turned to Ethan, her hands trembling slightly. "You help us," she said slowly, struggling with the words. "You give life again." Ethan smiled gently. "You did the hard part. I just gave you a ride." But she shook her head. "No, you—" "Good heart." The words hit him harder than he expected. He looked away for a moment, pretending to check the room. He didn't know how to respond. Kindness was something he wasn't used to receiving. He had always been the man who drifted from one job to another, never staying long enough to matter. But now, standing there with Lyra and her child safe in front of him, he felt something shift inside. Something real and human. That night, the colony invited them to a small gathering by the lakeside. Lanterns floated on the water, glowing softly in the dusk. People sang and played quiet music, celebrating the arrival of newcomers. Lyra sat close to the fire, watching the lights reflect on the surface of the lake. Ren danced around with the other children, his laughter echoing across the water. Ethan sat beside her, his gaze calm. "You see?" he said softly. "You're safe now." Lyra nodded, her eyes shining. She looked at him and said, "You go now?" He hesitated. "Maybe tomorrow," he replied. "I have to keep moving." She was silent for a while, looking at the stars reflected in the lake. "You no have home?" she asked. Ethan sighed. "Not really. My ship's my home, I guess." She frowned gently. "Ship, not heart," she said, touching her chest. "You need place for heart." Her words were simple, but they carried deep truth. Ethan didn't answer. He just stared at the glowing water, thinking about how long he had been running from everything, pretending he didn't need anyone. Later that night, as the fire burned low and the songs faded, Lyra thanked him again. "You save us." "I not forget," she said softly. "If you ever come back, you find family here." Ethan smiled faintly. "I'll remember that." He looked at the boy sleeping beside her and felt a warmth in his chest. Ren was safe now, dreaming without fear for the first time in years. Ethan quietly stood, giving them one last look before walking back to his ship. The next morning came quietly. The sun rose behind the silver hills, painting the sky in colors of rose and gold. Ethan prepared his ship for departure. Lyra and Ren came to see him off. Ren ran up to him, holding a small glowing stone, one of the healing crystals from their homeworld. "For you," Ren said, using the few human words he had learned. "Safe journey." Ethan crouched down, taking the crystal carefully. "Thank you, kid," he said, smiling. "I'll keep it close." Lyra stepped forward, her eyes filled with emotion. She touched the crystal in his hand and said, "Light, guide you." Then she placed her palm on his chest. Heart strong. Ethan felt his throat tighten again. "Take care of him," he said softly. "Take care of yourself," she nodded. "We live. We remember." For a moment they stood in silence, the wind carrying the scent of the morning fields around them. Then Ethan turned and walked up the ramp of his ship. The engines came to life with a soft hum. As the cruiser lifted off the ground, he looked down through the window one last time. Lyra stood with Ren beside the small house. The boy waved both hands in the air, smiling brightly. Lyra raised her hand too, her long hair blowing in the wind. Ethan smiled back, even though they couldn't see it. Then the ship rose higher, breaking through the clouds until the colony was just a tiny speck below. As space opened around him again, Ethan leaned back in his chair. The small crystal sat on the control panel, glowing faintly, a reminder of what he had done and of the people he had met. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel empty. He didn't feel lost. He wasn't sure where his next journey would lead, but he knew one thing. He would keep helping others no matter the risk. Somewhere deep inside, he realized that saving them had also saved him. He whispered to himself, "Maybe this is what I was meant to do." The stars stretched endlessly before him, bright and silent. Ethan smiled, tightened his grip on the controls, and guided the ship into the light. Far below on New Haven, Lyra looked up at the sky. She could still see a faint streak of silver where his ship had passed. She closed her eyes and whispered in her native tongue, a soft prayer of gratitude, and not just for safety, but for the stranger who had become a light in their darkest hour. And as the wind carried her words across the fields, the world felt peaceful again, safe, alive. full of hope.